What happens when one of Hollywood's most enduring icons, Clint Eastwood himself, walks into a bright and polished morning studio expecting a standard promotional puff piece and instead finds himself blindsided by a host with a mission? A moment that began with applause ends in confrontation, and what was supposed to be a celebration of cinema transforms into a nationally televised showdown of generational ideologies. This wasn't scripted, this wasn't expected, and it most definitely wasn't forgiven. If you're watching this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment, because you're about to witness Clint Eastwood like you've never seen him before. Cornered, provoked, and unapologetically raw. The soft glimmer of the studio lights dances across polished wood floors. A wall of screens beams nostalgic Clip Sturdy, Harry pulling a revolver, William Money staring into a graveyard of moral ambiguity, and Frankie Dunn pushing a young woman to fight for something more than just respect. The intro montage fades. Applause. Clint Eastwood enters from stage left, his posture still impossibly upright, his signature slow gait commanding every eye in the studio. 94 years old, yet every movement is deliberate, like a man with no time for wasted gestures. He offers a subtle nod to the crowd. They cheer, respectfully. This isn't your typical guest. This is the Clint Eastwood. George Stephanopoulos rises from his seat, extending a hand. Clint, it's an honor. Eastwood shakes it firm. Morning, he says, in that sandpaper voice that sounds like gravel mixed with gunpowder. The two sit. Let's talk about this latest film. George begins with a polished smile. You're directing again, 94, and still working. What keeps you going? Clint chuckles, his eyes twinkling slightly. Just like telling stories. That's all I've ever done. The first few minutes are smooth. Shifts, his smile tightens, his tone pivots. Clint, he says, you've been in Hollywood for more than 6 decades. A lot's changed. The industry today, it's more conscious about representation, inclusion, diversity. What's your take on that shift? Eastwood leans back. That easy grace stiffens just slightly. His eyes, the ones that once pierced across barroom standoffs and Leone westerns, narrow. I think, he says slowly, a good story's a good story. Always has been. You hire the best person for the job. George leans in, sensing the pivot. But don't you think that mindset ignores a systemic history of exclusion? Clint's jaw clenches just for a second. I think filmmaking is about honesty, Clint says, about characters that feel real, not quotas, not slogans. If you make a movie to win applause from Twitter, you're not telling a story. You're selling propaganda. The temperature drops. The live audience shifts. The sound booth falters. They cut to break? They don't. George keeps going, but surely, as someone who benefited from the old Hollywood system, you recognize that others didn't get the same shot. Eastwood leans forward now, both elbows resting on his knees, that fire behind his eyes returning. George, I grew up digging ditches. I worked steel. I wasn't handed anything. I didn't walk into a studio with a golden ticket. I auditioned, got rejected, worked again. I wasn't propped up by the system. I fought my way through it. You mean the system wasn't biased? George presses. It was tough. Not biased. There's a difference. And I respected that. Because if you made it, truly made it, too new, you earned it. George straightens his posture, no longer hiding the edge. In his voice, some critics would say your films often reinforced narrow views, white male leads, masculine archetypes, violence as justice. Clint raises his brow. You think I told stories about cowboys and cops and boxers because of some agenda? He asks. I told stories about human beings, people trying to survive, trying to redeem themselves. That's not politics, that's life. But it's a perspective, George insists, a limited one. Now Eastwood's voice gains steel. My films, limited. He leans closer. I made Gran Torino. I made $1 Million Baby. I made Letters from Iwo Jima from the Japanese perspective. You think that was easy to greenlight in this town? You made those films. Sure, George pushes. But the overall arc of your career celebrates a certain worldview, rugged individualism. Stoic men solving problems with violence. The arms of his chair, the audience can feel it's something's shifting. He's holding back. For now, I made films about soldiers, about fighters, about people who had nothing and clawed their way through life. That's not exclusion, that's reality. George doesn't flinch. but it's a reality told through one lens. Clint exhales long and slow and looks George dead in the eyes. You ever been on a movie set, George? Ever had to fight for a budget, a cast, a location? Ever had to call 200 people and tell them the project's dead because someone upstairs changed their mind? No? Then maybe don't lecture me about lenses. The control room lights flicker. No one moves. You've had control for decades, George says. Control over which stories got told. That kind of influence shapes culture. And I took that responsibility seriously. Clint fires back. I didn't make cartoons. I made films that mattered, that made people think, that made people feel. Through a conservative lens, George insists. Clint laughs slow and without humor. You think Unforgiven is a conservative movie? You think Mystic River is some Republican fable? You haven't watched my films, George. You've scanned the Wikipedia plot summaries. George tries again. How many women directors have you hired? How many black leads have starred in your films? I hire the best people for the job, Clint replies, even when they all look like you. Here, he asks, voice low, dangerous. George stands too, not backing down. I want to have a real conversation, one that acknowledges the responsibility that comes with your platform. What you want is a viral clip, Clint says. You're just being cheap. It's accountability, George replies. It's an ambush. Eastwood steps closer, towering now. You don't respect what I've done. You don't understand it. And you sure as hell don't have the right to judge it when you've never lifted a sandbag or held a boom mic or edited a scene at 4 a.m. trying to beat a deadline. George swallows hard. The silence in the studio is suffocating. Proving my point, George says quietly. You don't like being challenged. Clint's eyes blaze. I've been challenged my whole life. What I don't like is being lied to. If you wanted a debate, you should have told me that before. The cameras rolled. He turns toward the crew, toward the audience, toward the people at home. I came here out of respect for the audience, for the craft, but what I walked into was a trap. Then to George, you think you're making a statement. You're just making noise. And just like that, he unclips the mic. Clint's voice cut through the room like a low rumble before a storm. You think I made those films because they were easy? I made them because they were true, because they meant something. You don't need to put a rainbow flag on a poster, or hashtag every line of dialogue to tell a story with soul. George didn't flinch, but his breath hitched for a beat. He had stirred the lion, and now the lion was awake. We're not saying stories can't be powerful, Clint, George countered, but do you think there's real room for growth? For change? Clint's jaw tightened again, his weathered face unmoved. You know what I don't get, George? Why growth has to mean tearing down everything that came before. You want change? Make better films, write better characters. Don't just slap a new label on the same old script and pretend it's revolutionary. The studio had gone dead silent. Even the crew was watching now boom mic frozen in midair. Camera operators holding their breath. I'm not against change, Clint continued. Hell, I've changed. I used to think toughness meant silence. That emotion was weakness. But then I made $1 Million Baby. I saw what loss looked like, what love could do to a man. That changed me. The room held that moment, then George, softly. But what about when your voicier legacy drowns out, others trying to rise? Clint exhaled, then speak louder, work harder. If you want a seat at the table, don't wait for someone to hand it to you. Build your own damn table. It was both a challenge and a confession. The commercial brake light finally blinked on. The director in the control booth barked. Go to black, go to black. But the damage or the truth was already out there after the break. The air didn't lighten. George returned with a new card in his hand, his eyes flicking down at it. Let's talk politics for a second. Clint's lips barely moved. Do we have to? You've been vocal in the past, talking to chairs at conventions, making statements about leadership. You've called out both sides, but lately, your silence it's been interpreted as alignment. Clint gave a dry smile. Everything's interpreted these days. You eat a burger and someone calls you anti-vegan. The audience gave a soft, nervous laugh. Let me make this simple, Clint said. I don't follow parties, I follow action. If a man or woman stands for integrity, hard work, freedom, and responsibility, I'll back them. If they talk, in circles and sell empty promises. I don't care what letter comes after their name. But what about accountability? George pressed. You've worked with people accused of serious things. Doesn't silence, in those moments, become complicity? Clint looked directly at him. You want to talk about complicity? Where were all these watchdogs when Weinstein was building an empire? When Epstein was flying private with presidents and CEOs, nobody said a damn word until the whole tower fell. You want to come after me because I didn't tweet something? Because I didn't post a black square. He leaned in, eyes sharp. I live by actions, not hashtags. The room was on fire, but no one moved. The silence after that statement was so thick you could slice it with a Bowie knife. George tried to pivot. Okay, let's go back to the film, but Clint wasn't done. You asked me on here to talk about my work, my legacy. Instead, you ambushed me with some damn morality quiz. He stood and the audience gasped. I've played killers, heroes, broken men, redeemed men. I've filmed stories in jungles, deserts, locker rooms, and graveyards. But this, he motioned to the studio. This isn't a conversation. This is a firing squad in HD. George's eyes widened. Clint, sit please, we're live. No, Clint said, not breaking stride as he moved toward the edge of the stage. Which is why I'm walking out. Audience members started to stand, confused applauding, mourning, documenting. As Clint reached the curtain, he stopped, turned, and looked right into the camera. You want truth? Make art. You want justice? Earn it. You want legacy? Live it. Then he was gone, just like that. The screen lingered on the empty chair, still warm, still perfectly angled toward the host. The aftermath was immediate. Social media split like tectonic plates. Half declared Clint a relic of toxic tradition and brittle. The other half hailed him a warrior of truth, a man unwilling to be bent by the winds of performative outrage. Clips of the interview went viral. Reposted, remixed, reanalyzed. Clint Eastwood spent his career making noise. With quiet performances, had roared. And America heard every word. Some anchors called it an embarrassment. Others called it cinema in real time. In private circles, directors whispered, "Did you see that? My God, he still has it." And in one dimly lit editing room, a young filmmaker paused the playback, her eyes burning with inspiration. She didn't agree with everything Clint said, not even close, but she saw the power of conviction, of voice, of truth, even if it burned, and she picked up her pen. End note. So, what just happened? This wasn't just an interview. It was a line drawn. In the sand, a generational standoff, a cultural pulse check. Clint Eastwood didn't go there to be polite. He went there to be real. And whether you cheered or cringed, one thing's certain. You felt something. And isn't that what art is supposed to do? If this story shook you, inspired you, or made you question the game behind the scenes, then drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe for more explosive behind-the-curtain stories that Hollywood would rather keep buried. This is Prime Talk Show, where we don't just watch the drama, we bring it to light.